he has certainly exposed the potential partiality of the U.S. court system.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Beneath the Law. My name is Gavin. I'm here with my partner and good friend Stephen Teal. Stephen, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great, Gavin. What can I tell you? I got up in the morning, breathed in fresh air, and it's all good. And it's all good to be with you on our podcast.
Yes, a lovely time to be on a podcast. And what an interesting time it is indeed for the legal system, particularly with respect to our neighbors in the South, who, by the way, we learn so much from up here in Canada. I often think of the Canadian legal system as a bit of a hybrid between the British system and the American system. And as we evolve, I think we become more Americanized as time goes by, just by nature of geography and other things. But the big news of the day, of course, today, and everyone will know when we recorded this because it was the day after the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump's name should be stricken from the ballot. He cannot even be on the ballot. And, you know, there are many
I don't get that one.
Well, there are many people who will applaud that because they will agree with the result, that they would like the fact that what the outcome will be. But, you know, one of the things I think we talk about a lot on this podcast, hopefully, is the sense that the administration of justice, you know, has to be seen to be above the fray, if you will. The administrators of judges cannot be in the muck with the combatants in a trial. They are truly, or they should be seen to be above it. And, you know, I was thinking about when we were talking about doing this podcast today about bias and the impartiality of the judiciary and the importance of all of that. I was thinking about that statue that you see sometimes of justice, of, you know, with the goddess holding out the scales in front of her with the sword at her side. And one of the things that's quite important, I think, is that she wears the blindfold, because it's supposed to be seen that the judge is not sort of judging because they are in the fray of it. They are above it. They are seen to be impartial. They are blind in the sense that they don't have a bias one way or the other. They don't have a horse in the race. And I think that Donald Trump has done many, many things. But one thing that he has managed to do is to really put into focus that notion of bias and impartiality in the judicial system. And I worry, frankly, that the American judicial system will survive Donald Trump one way or the other, or whether he will put the judicial system in such a light that it almost consumes itself.
Well, I think from what I read in the media reports with respect to his trial in New York, he has certainly exposed the potential partiality of the U.S. court system. And we've talked about this before, right? Judges are elected in many states. I'm not sure if it's all states in the United States, but judges do get elected. And it's a highly politicized process, even the appointment process, right? I mean, we watch when Supreme Court justices in the U.S. are appointed, and it's very political. Let's call it what it is.
Hugely political. And I mean, I think in fairness, I was at a conference a week or so ago with a group of pretty senior American litigation counsel, and they were all bemoaning the fact that their judiciary is elected and how that was such a terrible thing and how it was so difficult because you never knew what you're going to get, and it was all so partial and whatnot. And, you know, I said, well, that doesn't happen in Canada. All of our judges are appointed. But I think that, you know, before we get too smug, I mean, I think your point about the appointment process of the U.S. Supreme Court, of course, which is not an elected position, and it is an appointed position, but it doesn't make it any less political, certainly in the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think that in the Canadian judicial system, we have managed to depoliticize it somewhat, and I really hope we continue to do that. I really hope that while judges are politically appointed in the sense that politicians appoint members of the judiciary, both federally and provincially, I think that our judges have done a pretty good job of leaving their political affiliations at the doorstep of the courthouse when they put on their judicial robes. And I really hope that continues.
Well, and we see that too, in just in terms of our foundation principles. And I'm assuming that it's not any different in the United States, Gavin, with respect to the presumption of impartiality. You brought up the image of the of justice holding the scales with her blindfold on, and that underpins our court system. That rule basically arises out of judges are required to take an oath of office and to be impartial, and that oath is viewed certainly in our justice system as being almost sacrosanct. And so there is that presumption of impartiality in every judge and decision maker, quite frankly, even at the tribunal levels, that applies. And when you see a decision maker behaving in a way or conducting himself or herself in a way that, to me, raises eyebrows with respect to comments, certainly in Mr. Trump's civil trial, it certainly puts into question whether indeed Mr. Trump is getting a fair trial, and that should never be the case for anybody.
Yeah, I just before we get into the meat of the comments that I think inspired this episode, I think that what's important to underline here is really what's at stake, to my mind. I think that the justice system relies on the confidence of the public. Just like everything in a democracy really relies on the confidence in the public. The public must believe in the validity of the institutions of a given society. Once the public loses that confidence, the society collapses. That is the definition of anarchy. And one of the things that the public must have confidence in terms of the justice system is the impartiality of decision makers. If people think that the fix is in, for lack of a better word, regardless, and there is no fairness in the sense that they will not be heard, their side will not be considered. Going to trial is Kafkaesque in the sense of a complete waste of time. The decision has been determined beforehand. Then there is no point to a justice system. There is no point to a impartial judiciary. There is no confidence in the fairness of that. And once that is eroded, I think we see a complete lack of respect for the rule of law. We see a complete lack of respect for the administration of justice in a society. So it really is corrosive, in my view, of a fundamental institution of our society. And that is, just like the statue of justice, beyond the fray. It doesn't matter who the winner or the loser is. The system is more important, and confidence in the system is more important than the outcome of any single case. And I think that is really where some of the judiciary in the U.S. need to be very, very careful when dealing with someone like Donald Trump, who is so masterful at manipulating and pitting one side against the other, that they don't fall into the temptation to deliver to their side as opposed to the other side, and not realize that what their real job is to have no side at all.
You're bang on with respect to that last point, right? An adjudicator or decision maker should not be on any side. And, I think it's, while it's sometimes hard for a judge to keep their mouth closed and to let things play out, they really do have to step back, and they cannot get into the fray of the battle. It's quite disappointing when you see a decision maker not, providing fairness to all the parties, and just, making decisions without actually carefully considering their position. And that, that raises bias in the view of, as you say, the potential losing party. And, when I look at Donald Trump's case here, and there was a ruling. So the ruling came out with respect to this directed verdict and the comments that the judge made, and it's a blistering ruling, and continues basically to say, well, you're not going to be believed anyway, and it doesn't matter. The closing submissions are weeks away, but in my view, looking at it objectively, how can Donald Trump win this case?
Yeah, so let's just back up from that. I mean, there's lots of people go to trials with cases, and the cases are oftentimes losers before you go to trial. And they are. There's some cases are winners and some cases are losers. And, no matter how skillful the lawyer is or what have you, doesn't matter. I mean, I always analogize it in my own mind to, cases are like horses and lawyers are like jockeys. And sometimes, your horses win races. Jockeys can lose races sometimes, and the key is don't fall off the horse. But, that is, to my mind, that, yeah, there are winners and there are losers. But picking up on your point, we had the good fortune of working many years ago with the late Lloyd Holden, who was truly a great jurist and a great judge. And his famous comment to me was, I remember one time he says, toughest job a trial judge has is to keep their mouth shut. Because, as a trial judge, I'm sure it's a winner or a loser almost when you've read the brief before you walk in the courtroom. But you've got to keep an open mind and a closed mouth in terms of that case until you've heard all the evidence and all the submissions. And it may, and probably likely does, turn out just like you predicted it at the beginning. But let's just get right down to what the comment was. It's sort of, I think our mouths both dropped when we read it. In terms of this, interlocutory in the middle of issues in this directed verdict situation. So a directed verdict is a request by one side or the other to immediately come to a decision based upon the fact that there is, that there is no way that this case can succeed. And this relates to the civil fraud trial, which is another story in and of itself. Being brought by the state of New York as against Donald Trump. If you've lost the track of how many court proceedings are involving Donald Trump right now, you can't. No one could blame you. No one could possibly keep track of it all. I'm surprised he can. But this one, the judge said some things that I just, frankly, my eyeballs popped open. Not because that I didn't think that the judge might not be thinking these things. I frankly would be surprised if the judge wasn't thinking these things. But it was just shocking to me that a judge would say this on the record in the middle of a trial. And let me just put it for our listeners after the moment what the judge said. And in the context of it was in the context of counsel for Trump saying they wanted to bring a motion for a directed verdict. And wanted to file materials for the judge to consider. And the judge said in response to that request to file this motion was, quote, "There is no way I'm going to grant that. You'd be wasting your time, but I'm not going to tell you not to send me something. It doesn't mean I'll entertain it." So, wow. Talk about calling a strike before the pitcher's even thrown the ball.
I think he's called the batter out before the first pitch has been even thrown. So,
yeah, I mean, it may be a crazy motion. It probably was a crazy motion, but I mean, this is just the I think a statement like that is just irresponsible on the part of a judge for a number of reasons. Because it's undoubtedly the case that he was not going to allow the motion. Okay, but you've got to understand that this will be played by the other side, by the Trump camp, as saying, see, the fix was in. There's no matter what we do, it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter how brilliant our argument is. It doesn't matter how much merit it has. We are going to lose. And we didn't get a fair trial. And it just plays right into his whole narrative. And it just is amazing to me that a very intelligent a person like the judge hearing this trial would so easily fall into that quicksand.
Well, and it seems like that statement, Gavin, is not one that has been said only on rare occasions. That he's made other comments because in reviewing what has taken place in this trial, Trump's lawyers have already said that he's not going to get a fair trial, and in their words, through astonishing departures from ordinary standards of impartiality. So this is not it does not appear to be an isolated comment. And, I think that's important for the listener to understand. If it was a one-off comment, you'd have a very, very difficult time demonstrating or proving that the decision maker was biased. But if there have been a number of occasions where the judge has made comments that are similar to the one that he recently made, you have a stronger argument to make.
100%. I mean, I can say that I have experienced that personally. Tried a case a number of years ago that was I confess, of doubtful merit in terms of my side of the case, but an arguable case and deserving, I think, of the court's listening to the argument before they said the argument was nonsense. And I think unfortunately for all concerned, that the trial judge was quite vocal in terms of his critique of the case and the position, and had clearly evinced a intention to rule one way or the other before all the evidence was in and before all the submissions were made. And what happened in that case, I think it's one of the few cases, very, very few that I can recall. We appealed the case on the basis of bias, which is never an easy thing to do. It's not something I actually have, as I think and I hopefully our listeners know, I have a huge respect for the judiciary. I think it's a very difficult job. I think it's something, it's not even a job, it's a vocation to my mind. And I have great respect for the judiciary and the institution of the judiciary. And no one likes to allege that someone was biased. It's not something you look to do. But we went to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal reversed the case on the basis of the bias. And it was not, and this is important for our listeners to understand too, it was not on the basis, you see, the judge had made up his mind beforehand. Because judges will often test you in terms of your position by putting things to you that are contrary to your position, playing devil's advocate, if you will, to test various theories of your case. And as an advocate, I think you welcome that, because that allows you to address the points of your argument that are giving the judge trouble. But the point that the Court of Appeal made in my case, I think the Court of Appeal will ultimately deal with in this Trump case, and is, would a reasonable person viewing this objectively think that the judge had predetermined the issue? I don't know that you can read a comment like that and think anything else.
I don't disagree with that statement at all, Gavin. And look, it's very difficult to pin down what is judicial bias precisely. We know what it's not. It's not suspicion that I'm suspicious that the judge is not impartial. We know that, and it's not certain other things as well. I mean, criticism of counsel doesn't fall within judicial bias. Dissatisfaction with the ultimate outcome of the decision does not mean that it's been biased. But it really is a contextual and fact-specific analysis, and it really focuses on the manner in which the decision maker has conducted himself or herself, either at a motion or at a trial, and then stepping back and looking at it in its totality. So what has happened here in Mr. Trump's trial, that's one isolated statement. But, as I said, reading this decision with respect to dismissing the directed verdict, he's already criticized the expert, basically said, well, you can pay $1 million and the expert will say anything. The trial is based on valuations, and valuations can be interpreted. When Mr. Trump seeks loans, I suppose, like anybody else, I may say my property is worth, $10 million. But the bank will say, well, we don't think so. It's only worth $6 million. And, the judge has already said, well, it doesn't matter how you interpret what has been said. A lie is a lie. So there's, again, indications of predetermination. This trial's not over yet.
It's far from over, but maybe it is over. Maybe that's my point. My point exactly is, in my case, what happened was the Court of Appeal didn't decide the case in my favor. They sent the case back for another trial. What a colossal waste of time. I mean, that is one of the things. I mean, it's a very, very fine line, but I think that, from the judiciary perspective, this is what's critically important, is that if your job is important, the work you're doing is important, but it can be thrown out the window, frankly, by foolish comments of verbalization of what you may be thinking, and not following, the late Justice Holden's rule of the toughest job you have is to keep your mouth shut, because it could lead to the entire process having to be done all over again. And I have to say that if Trump's lawyers are smart, they're in there taking the slings and arrows and provoking probably this judge to making further comments such as this to feed the record for their appeal. And if they aren't doing that, they're not very good counsel, because they should know at this point they probably got a loser of a case, and their best hope for winning on appeal is to just feed a record so full of bias that they get a do-over on the whole thing. And by that time, who knows what the political climate may be.
Well, and just on that point, the listener might be shocked to learn this, but even if the ultimate result is found to have been correct, if there is a finding of judicial bias, that decision will be thrown out, because judicial bias taints the result.
Right. It goes back to our point that we talked about at the beginning, that because judicial bias as a corrosive agent attacks more than just the merits of any particular case. It is corrosive to the whole institution of the administration of justice within a society. And if you cannot have cases stand that would appear to have been decided unfairly, even if, as I agree, even if they came to the right answer. And, it works both ways too, because it is an insidious allegation at the same time. So flipping it to the other side, what you've got is Trump says everybody who disagrees with this obviously biased and out to get him, and it's the conspiracy theory extraordinaire all the time. And that's his MO, quite frankly. But there was another case I was involved in, which many years ago, which it was a decision of Justice Doherty, which has been repeated many, many times, Justice Doherty of the Ontario Court of Appeal. And it was about an individual who refused to appear in front of Justice Doherty on a matter that I was involved with on the other side for all sorts of reasons, one of which was his, quote, scowling visage. And Justice Doherty decided the case, but actually wrote a very insightful decision. And he says that, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the decision in front of me, but he said it is a very insidious practice for litigants to, frankly, judge shop by then creating allegations of bias to try to pick the judge that they want by eliminating those that they don't, and creating manufactured nonsense about why they're not getting a fair shake in front of an individual judge in order to basically upset the entire system. And that is probably just as evil as the other side of it. But I think that in fairness, litigants will do all sorts of crazy things. And judges, one of the things about being the vocation is they have to be so restrained. They have to be so judicious in the way that they approach their tasks.
But for Trump's lawyers, do they then not need to be a little careful as well that it does not appear that this argument of bias, which frankly, it's set up already, is not just tactical?
I wonder about that. I wonder if, but I think at this point, though, with these comments, I don't know what the bait that they've thrown out there for them, but boy, has this judge ever taken it.
Yeah, no, it harkens back to your situation, which I remember very well, because you were a younger lawyer at the time, taking these bullets from the judge and not being able to present your evidence, and you were actually quite distressed about it. I can recall, that it's what do I do? What do I do? And basically I can recall Lloyd Holden saying to you, just keep going back in there, keep going back.
Go in and take it. It was like the rumble in the jungle, the rope-a-dope. But to quote Earl Cherniak, one of his famous quotes, Earl Cherniak, a very legendary litigator here in Ontario, once said, I think, he who wins last wins. So there you go. But for the purposes of bias, though, I think that, this is one of those issues that, Trump has really managed to use to his great advantage and to quite eviscerate, for lack of a better word, for his followers and for those who are even on the fence. I think the perception, if I can say this, in the court of public opinion, I think there is a profound belief that he is not, this is a very politically motivated, and he is not getting a fair shake. Now, that may or may not be true. And I think the people who are not his supporters and people who are very much his adversaries are cheering these decisions. But in a strange way, all of this is helping him because it is feeding that narrative that it's us versus them. Look, the system is rigged against you. Look what they're doing to me. I am your representative. What they are doing to me is what they are trying to do to you too. And this is this idea of you're the downtrodden, and we must rise up against this institutions that are stacked against us.
It's it's a very scary situation in some respects too, Gavin, because what that leads to is a view among the populace that their institutions are not serving them. And in a democracy, certainly in the U.S. Democracy, where their constitution gives you a right to bear arms, the United States of America was created by revolution. They've had their civil war, or they've had a civil war. And, Trump is basically fanning the flames of a potential other civil war by basically painting the picture that the institutions are stacked against you.
Absolutely. And I think that if I can, not that I'm not in any position to be lecturing any judges on anything, but another, great statement that I always keep in my mind from Justice Holden, in addition to the keep your mouth shut quote, was he said to me once that, the most important person in the courtroom is the person who's going to lose. Winners are never very critical of a judge. Lawyers will often say, I like that judge. I won my last case in front of them. But it's the loser that really matters. The loser in a civil action is the one who does all the paying. The loser in a criminal proceeding is the one who does the time in jail. They're the ones who have to feel, frankly, that they got a fair shake. And if they don't feel they got a fair shake, and they oftentimes they don't, they're dissatisfied with the result, etc. And if they're like Trump. But I think that from the judge's perspective, particularly in this, where they know how cynically this is being used, they know that it's being turned against them. I mean, surely the judge in Trump's civil trial knows at this point in time that the defense strategy is to just bait him consistently into saying silly things. I would have thought at that point that they would be going out of their way, bending over backwards to give the appearance, if nothing else, of impartiality, the appearance that they are listening carefully, the appearance that they are duly considering the arguments before making a decision and waiting to hear all of the evidence. And they just don't seem to want to play that role.
Well, I'm just thinking about, you and I have been involved in very, very high-profile civil matters that have involved politicians, that have involved a great deal of media interest. We defended Rob Ford in a defamation case, and if you can recall that 4 or 5 day trial, it was packed every day with every media person around. And then we did the contested election case, and the media was sitting on the floors of the courtroom. And I think that was the first Twitter fed trial that I can recollect people at the office were following, because the reporters were tweeting out what was going on. And, this better than I do, but for most listeners, the courts are pretty empty. There's nobody sitting in the pews. This is not Perry Mason or any of those TV shows where you have packed courthouses. They're pretty empty. And so when you have a lot of people in the court, I think the judges get excited. And then they also become a participant rather than sitting there. One of the judges that I can recall, Randy Eklund, the late Randy Eklund, he used to have a candy jar on his bench. And so, whenever something happened, he'd just reach for a candy and chew his candy so that he would be keeping his mouth shut. But in these high-profile cases, I think the judges are almost compelled to also play a supporting role, so to speak.
Well, particularly, I think, in the U.S., where they're also got to be thinking about their next campaign. And here's a chance for me to get my sound bites out there to my voting base. So that, I think, is really does play into it. I will say that, I do think the Canadian judiciary, at least in my experience, speaking of the matters that you mentioned, I mean, we were fortunate to have some very, very good judges who really, I'm not inviting them to my poker game, because they had poker faces most of the way through, and if anything, pushed us pretty hard on our side. We were successful in both of those cases, but they did, I think, give a fair and a balanced impression to any reasonable observer, including the media that was involved, that both sides were getting a fair shake in terms of the court listening to what they had to say, listening to the evidence, listening to the arguments, and then giving it all of the consideration that it was due, and then coming out with what were, I thought, some pretty impressively reasoned decisions.
Yeah,
that's how it should happen.
Yeah, and just to interrupt you, I think we should actually give a shout out to Justice McDonald, who heard the Rob Ford case, and Justice Lederer, who heard the Boris Jesnevsky case at first instance. They did a great job.
They did a great job, and they did not only a great job in terms of the reasons, but in terms of the manner in which they dealt with it. And Justice McDonald in particular, I mean, that case was a media frenzy, and I think that without exception, the media were extraordinarily appreciative of the judicial demeanor, if I can call it that, which Justice McDonald exhibited. I mean, he really was a made-for-TV judge, to be honest with you, because he did sit there very stoically, listening to the evidence very, very carefully, and did not tip his hand one way or the other throughout the whole thing. I didn't know how it was going for us, to be honest. I didn't know whether we were winning or losing until the end of it. And that is exactly, frankly, how I think a judge should conduct themselves in any hearing, particularly one of any kind of public notoriety. Because the administration of justice matters, and people's confidence in it matters. And just like at a hockey game, if you think the referee is a homer for the other side, it ruins the game. Nobody likes a hockey game where the refs get too involved. No one likes it where they feel that nobody got a fair shake. Even the team that wins, generally speaking, feels like, yeah, it was a bit of a fix. It really wasn't a victory at all. So, it is a very trying, if I can use that word, time for the administration of justice, certainly in the United States. And I would encourage if there is any American justices listening, to not fall into the trap that may be laid for them that allows for this division to be brought to the bench. The bench has to be above the battle. So, Stephen, this has been a very interesting conversation from my perspective, one that, think about quite a bit in our day-to-day work. And I think that hopefully our listeners have had some chance to reflect on some of all of this and put it in a little bit of perspective that, at the end of the piece, we as a society and as a democracy in both Canada and the United States have to survive what is going to invariably be the most hotly contested political fight. I won't even go so far as to call it an election in certainly in recent memory, but maybe in history. And if the administration of justice can't rise above it, we're in a lot of trouble.
Well, I just want to pick up on a point because, it's a very good contrast. Judges need to be above the battle, and we're here to put you beneath the law.
So that's right. So we'll give our famous tagline. So thank you once again for joining us. Please rate us on any of your podcast providers. I think we're everywhere. Really appreciate our listeners who follow us and tune in. And thank you so much for your time to listen and your attention as we ruminate on the vagaries of the legal system. And always remember that if no one is above the law, everyone is beneath it.